Hi, my name is Jennifer Storm, and I am the Coordinator for Advocacy and Community Outreach for Andrea ASEAN Fund. Today we're going to talk about the warning signs to look out for child sexual abuse and really get into the impacts of childhood sexual abuse. We know that 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys will be sexually abused before they turn 18 years old. These are devastating statistics. We want to be able to prevent sexual violence. As a society, we want to live in a world where we can actually end sexual abuse. In order to do that, we need to know how to spot it when it's happening and how to intervene. And then we also need to be able to ensure that we are responding properly to sexual violence, because oftentimes sexual abuse can be a cycle in a person's life. It's not uncommon for victims to have been abused more than once in their lifetime. A lot of that has to do with the lack of intervention and the lack of supportive resources that can truly allow that victim to heal and cope in a healthy way. So today we're going to talk about those warning signs. As a parent, as a caregiver, what do you look out for? What are those changes in the behavior of your child that you need to be aware of? Nobody knows your child like you do. So first and foremost, understand that the tips that I'm about to provide, these are general signs to look out for, but again, you know your child best. So any deviation from typical behavior that your child is engaging in will be a red flag, should be a red flag for you. But there are some telltale signs of childhood sexual abuse. So let's start with behavioral. If a child all of a sudden starts losing interest in things that they once loved, sporting events, sporting activities, school, camp, church, right? If there are places or activities that your child once loved and thrived in, and now all of a sudden they want nothing to do with that activity, that's something to look into. Not saying that that necessarily means that that child is being sexually abused in that environment, yet there is definitely a pause to be taken to get a little bit curious with your child about what is it that they're no longer interested in. Is it just that they no longer like that sport? And if so, that's okay. But ask those questions, get curious with your child. And we're not talking about the flip it like, oh, I liked basketball on Tuesday, but now I want to play soccer. It's more those activities or those places that you see your child light up in, and then all of a sudden you start to see that that light has gone away. Always ask your child questions, not loaded questions with information, but just get curious. Well, what is it about that activity that you used to love that you no longer love anymore? What is it about this place that no longer feels like somewhere you want to go? Ask those questions and try to get your child to feel comfortable and safe to disclose some of the reasons. If there is a person in your child's life that they once loved to be around, maybe they would play with them a lot, or they loved going to Uncle Joe's house, or maybe they loved going to the camp because there was a particular camp counselor that they really connected with. If you notice all of a sudden that that person is no longer someone your child talks about, or if by the very mention of that person, you see a different response from your child, that's something to get curious about. That is something to ask questions about. Children don't typically just radically change their opinion about people. Usually something has transpired. And again, that doesn't necessarily mean that your child's being sexually abused. There could have been just a personality difference. They could have maybe held them accountable in a way that the child was uncomfortable with, that have changed their opinion about wanting to be around them. It's always important though to ask those questions, to get curious with your child, but to be aware. And it's good for your child to know that you're noticing these things. The more you ask questions and the more that your child knows that you are involved in their life and you're asking these questions and you're observing these things, the more likely they might be to disclose to you, to talk with you. Another sign to look out for is any regression in development. So children, they make certain markers in developmental goals and strides. They'll learn to go on the potty, they'll stop sucking their thumb, or maybe they'll stop carrying that blankie around that used to be a source of comfort for them, or they start sleeping through the night. Those kind of traditional developmental markers, if you start to see a real regression or a deviation, those are good red flags to look out for. Things like, is my child wetting the bed? Is my child soiling their underwear again? Are they coming home from camp every day with a dirty pants? Are they not sleeping through the night? Are they all of a sudden coming into your room 1, 2, 3, 4 times at night, having nightmares, feeling scared? If they start having those types of deviations from their behavior, that's a time to get curious, ask questions, start to peel back some layers there, because it could be an indication that something's happening to them. Any change in behavior could lead to an indication of additional stress in that child's life, and it's certainly important to get curious about what's happening with your child in those moments. Any changes in school performance, activities that they used to excel in, you want to look for those incremental but also significant deviations in behavior. So maybe your child used to love school and they were getting really good grades and they got up every morning and they were excited to go to school. And maybe now they're more withdrawn. They don't want to go to school. They are avoidant. Their grades are suffering. They're having a hard time paying attention. These are all indicators that there is a significant stressor in that child's life. Some of the big behavioral things to look out for are self-harm, suicidal ideation. Is your child all of a sudden sullen and reserved and avoidant? If your child begins to engage substances, it is incredibly common and an all too often coping mechanism for survivors of sexual abuse to turn to drugs and alcohol. If you start to see this behavior in your child, ask questions, get curious. Oftentimes, children will use drugs and alcohol as a way to cope with the feelings that they don't know how to deal with. No one is given the tools to cope with something as devastating as sexual abuse. So children and teens and young adults will turn to anything they can find to help quell the pain that they're experiencing. Self-harm, cutting, engaging in drug and alcohol, promiscuous sexual behavior. This is often a misnomer and oftentimes really mislabeled and misunderstood in young people. If you have a child who never had really any interest in the opposite sex or the same sex or any type of dating or sexuality at all, and now they are hypersexual and hyper aware of their sexuality, that's an indicator that something may have happened to that child. Now, as we raise children and they grow through their developmental phases and they hit adolescence, you're going to see some of these changes that are just natural. But any deviation from what would feel like a norm should be something that you would want to talk with not only your child about, but talk with their doctor about. Hypersexualization is a very common byproduct of sexual abuse. It's often very misunderstood. Some of the physical symptoms that you should look out within children are burning, itching, rashes in their genital area, sexually transmitted diseases, any pain. Oftentimes little kids will not be able to verbalize their pain, but they can express it with physical symptoms. So maybe they have tummy aches a lot. Maybe they're complaining of headaches all the time. Maybe they're going to the nurse more than they usually do, and they're complaining about physical ailments. Maybe they're having a hard time sleeping. They don't want to get up in the morning. All of those types of behavioral shifts that are not typical for your child are indications that you need to look into. These are just some of the signs and symptoms to look out for with kids. As we said, every person experiences sexual violence differently, and only you know your child. You know the typical behaviors of your child, and then you understand and appreciate when they might shift or when those behaviors might deviate from what would be the typical norm for them. Any added stress in the child's life is going to create disruption in their regular patterns and their regular behaviors. We expect that. Sometimes school can become stressful, activities can become stressful, just growing up can become stressful. So not all of these warning signs are indicators of sexual abuse. However, they can be, and it's always important to have frequent conversations with your children. First and foremost, believe what your child is telling you. Even if it sounds so out of left field, believe them, trust what they're saying to you, and then ask more questions, get curious. Let your child know that you are a safe person to talk to. If you don't have the tools or resources to talk to with your child, tell them that you'll find the resources. You'll find someone that can. Get them a hotline number, get them a counselor, talk to a therapist, read books. There are so many resources out there for how to cope with children in the aftermath of sexual violence. You do not have to do it alone. We also know that often our parents they're not the ones that children want to talk to, right? Parents are usually sometimes the last person a child will go to. And that's for a myriad of reasons. So having other supportive resources at your child's fingertips are going to be really important, because they might not tell you, but they might tell this other trusted adult that's in their life. They might call that hotline that you gave them. They might see that book that you've left for them and pick it up and read it and start to feel seen and heard. So know that you can resource a child and not necessarily always have to be that resource for them. The more we talk to children, the more age-appropriate resources that we can give them, the better equipped they're going to be to identify sexual abuse for themselves and then to talk to someone about it. Teaching children things like emotional regulation, right? We do this through teaching children what feelings are, how they present themselves. How do we cope with feelings? How do we process our emotions in a healthy way? If a child feels anger, what do they do with that anger? If they feel sadness, what do they do with that sadness? It seems kind of silly to talk with children about these everyday things that we all experience, but it's how they develop emotional maturity. It's how they develop emotional regulation. If they know their feelings and they understand how to process them appropriately, if and when something does happen in their life that is bad or scary, they're going to know how to process through that emotion without turning to a negative coping or maladaptive coping mechanism, such as cutting, self-harm in other ways, substance use. Teaching children how to feel and how to cope in a healthy way is giving them a huge gift that will last their whole life. These are just some of the ways that you can help children cope in the aftermath of sexual abuse, and some of the ways that you can look out for the warning signs, and also some tips on preventing sexual abuse from ever happening in your child's life in the first place. We hope you found these tips helpful. As always, Andreazian Foot is here to listen, to evaluate any claims or cases that you may have, and to help resource you and your family. If you ever need any assistance, please don't hesitate to pick up the phone and call Andreazian Foot today. We're here to help.